Hey traders, this is Cousin Benny coming to you on August the 25th, Sunday, from theclosingprint.com with your weekly market read. Starting with the S&P 500, we can see that we had a nice change in the rhythm of NYMO. We had a bottom here, similar at minus 100. Like we saw back in November and again in June. Volume is a little bit less than what I would like to see, and we do have a crossover to the downside of the 10 EMA. The price is between the zone marked by the 10 EMA here and the 30 EMA at the top. I'm also watching the XII, which is the New York Stock Exchange ARCA Institutional Index, which is a capitalization weighted index of 75 stocks most widely held as equity investments among institutional equity portfolios. The importance here is that it's designed to reflect the performance of their core stock holdings of these institutions. So I like to watch the buying and selling as institutions push the market around using the stocks that are in this index. Now, if you look at the components, it's no surprise that we would see the stocks that are mentioned here and their corresponding weighting in this index. It's much easier to trade 75 stocks than it is to 500 to move the market around. You can see that these are very well-known names, and what these institutions tend to hold across all funds. So with the XII, we saw a bounce, almost came down to the 618, bounced right around the 50% fibs, and are currently right at the 10-period EMA. I would expect this to give us some indication which direction it's going to go this week, with stochastics continue to point higher, like we saw here in June. And then we saw the subsequent rally. Now, the thing that I was noticing here is that once we had this bullish crossover here, we had 1, 2, 3, 4 pullbacks, and the trend continued before we had this fourth one, in which case we failed. Whereas we had this crossover, bullish cross of the 10 and the 30, and we quickly lost that trend line. Whereas here we had quite an extensive run. So the fact that we failed so quickly starts to make me lean towards the fact that maybe we're seeing a shoulder here ahead and the possibility of a move lower down to a neckline into September, which would coincide nicely with a seasonality trade and a trade higher from September into March, April, and May of next year, before we start to see institutions sell in May and go away. So that's what I'm thinking right now currently. But this is the S&P 500 overlaid with a bullish percent. Note that the red lines are areas where we were overbought in the 85 range and turned over. And then the green lines obviously is when we got down to the low. We haven't seen a low yet, so that's something else I'm watching to see whether a bullish percent gets back up here above 85 or if it fails and moves down lower from this 80 level. This is an overlay of the S&P advanced decline, looking for 90% up days versus 90% down days for capitulation. You can see we've had some nice buying here with volume and advanced decline. We can see that the up volume has trumped down volume somewhat on Thursday and Friday, but we did have in the beginning of the week, Monday and Wednesday, some pretty intense down volume. So this is basically a wash on these two. I'd be looking for a spike like we see here or here to give us an idea if there's any capitulation on the bulls or the bears part going into the week. Breaking the S&P down further, we can see the defensive sectors here along the bottom, XLP, XLU, XLV, are all showing weakness relative to the other sectors, except for XLV, which is sitting right on its 50-period moving average. Looking at the cyclicals, the XLY, and the other offensive sectors, XLE, XLF, XLI, XLK, we can see that they're holding their 50 period. In the case of technology, we've got it back above the 20. XLI is about to get there, and so is XLE. XLF still needs to show us that it's going to move higher above this level, and one of the sectors I'll be watching closely for a pass or fail going into the week. The other sectors I have on here, obviously, the one that's been really shining is XBI, the biotech sector. Note the bounce off the 50 period. Real estate continues to underperform. The builders are basically moving sideways in this downward wedge. The banks, BKX, is looking pretty decent, as well as KRE, which is flagging out here right above and right along the 20 period EMA. So watch these sectors going into the week for your trades. If you're thinking of trading banks, be cognizant of the 10-year Treasury note, which you want to watch the yield here, which is TNX. If this continues to move lower for the week, you want to keep an eye on that versus interest-sensitive stocks like banks, mortgage REITs, and so forth. Keep an eye on this for a bounce or a continuation higher on the bond yields. Note that TLT had a nice little bottom here. Hugh Carlowitz is talking about this in his weekly blog post, if I'm not mistaken. Note copper has had quite a move over the last few weeks, where RSI is and where price is relative to the 200 period is flagging right underneath here. So this is an indication of the health of the construction market and various other markets when you're looking at copper and you're thinking of the S&P 500. This seems to be working quite nicely to show strength. So we want to see that continue higher if you're bullish on the markets. Note where MACD is and stochastics. Both are overbought and could come in a bit and come back down to the 50 period moving average here, the blue line. Looking at the European top 100, the EUR, note that we have this trend line that we came back up and tested. We were talking about this last week. We got back above this trend line and then we failed, came down to the 50 period, bounced, and now we're back up and retesting this. So keep an eye on this during the week for a continuation move higher or a rejection here at this trend line. This is a chart of the Russell. We saw this ratio move here, and then we peaked, and we have this downward trending channel. We see some support here. It's a possibility this could roll over, come down and touch the top of Kumo and bounce, or it could fail and move back down through Kumo. We never did come back down to the 382, taking in these lows from November up to these highs. We do have MACD looking like it wants to turn higher, and stochastics has already given a signal, a buy signal. So keep an eye on that for a continuation move and a breakout of this bullish descending channel on the Russell. Rounding this off, if you look at the comp, we can see that we're flagging, and we got back, the price got back above Tenkan and Kijun. Kumo's down here at 30, 35, 25 or so. Stochastics gave a buy signal here last week, and MACD looks like it's going to go, histogram looks like it wants to go back above zero. So keep an eye on the Russell and the comp for indications that maybe we could see some bullishness in the market versus what I'm thinking would be bearishness into this seasonality trade into the end of September. If you follow me, you know that I use what's a technique called the box trade. This is a scan criteria here that I use with stockcharts.com. You can set up a custom scan yourself. Basically, this scan looks at stocks that trade over 500,000 shares. And looking at this information here, daily high less than yesterday's daily high, and yesterday's daily high is less than 2 days ago daily high, so on and so forth. The 10 EMA is above the 30 EMA. The daily close is greater than the 30 EMA, yada, yada, yada. Basically what this looks like when you're charting is the 10 period EMA is above the 30-period MA, so that's a bullish trend. So we would take long trades. We would look for our first crossover, and then we buy the pullbacks. Okay, so we held the 10-period EMA here, and you could have traded anywhere along this, or waited for a pullback into this zone, what I call a box trade setup like we have here. So we had this nice crossover, a 3-month rally, 4-month rally, moved sideways. Now we had our first bullish crossover, and now we're coming back into a box setup with Williams %R pointing to a possibility of a bounce, as well as stochastics. If we look, then that was APO, Apollo Global Management. They are a publicly owned investment manager, and they primarily provide services to pension and endowment funds, and institutional investors, individual investors, and pooled investment vehicles and corporations. The next trade is Eagle Bulk Shipping, and this is from a box trade. This is a scam, by the way. Now, I've already put together a watch list of this group. You'll note some of these names here: Hawaiian Airlines, Apollo Global Management, Salesforce, and so forth. I took out the stocks that looked the best, and I put them together in a trade setup. So Eagle Bulk Shipping, this is one that had a nice trend break. We moved sideways. We're breaking out here. A cheap stock. Keep an eye on it. We're in this Kirby zone. We could possibly see a move up to the 525.40 area before we see some hesitation. Ellie Mae. Now, this company provides automated software for the mortgage industry. Estee Lauder. This is a trade that I believe Sunrise Trader was looking at last week. A nice descending pattern here. We had a crossover. We haven't had a crossover on this particular name since back here in December, and we had a subsequent move over half of the first half of the year. We had a nice consolidation here, and note the volume, which would indicate that institutions are buying the name again. So we're looking for a continued move here and a momentum trade to the upside on Estee Lauder that could last for weeks or even months going into year end. It's a well-known name. Obviously, you know that they're right at the front of many big name stores like Macy's and Neiman Marcus and so forth. So Estee Lauder is a pretty well-known name and one to keep an eye on. Hawaiian Airlines is looking really good. Nice cup and handle pattern. I'd like to see a breakout of this pattern on volume, so keep an eye on that. This is a watch list item. Note that we're above the Kirby level here as well. Humana, a health name, a little breakout on Friday. A nice long pattern here, third or fourth stage pullbacks, so keep an eye on that. This, I'd only be looking for a scalp or two, or possibly a nice consolidation pattern for a trade. Immunomedics, IMMU, nice flag pattern here. We're breaking above the 10 period and a nice flag with volume. Ingram Micro, nice cup and handle, breakout. We had some momentum traders here. We're flagging out here and basing. The 30 period is catching up. We're right at the 10 period, and we're right at this Kirby ceiling. Keep an eye on this for stochastics to get oversold and a spike in volume. Note all this volume here, this accumulation, so I would say that they're in for at least a little while longer. Lexmark, if you know these guys at all, they're giving Hewlett-Packard a run for their money with printers. They sell to the corporations for their print servers and printers throughout their companies. Keep an eye on this company as it's setting up a box trade here with Williams %R showing a buy signal. We're above the Kirby levels, and stochastics also is oversold. I'd want to see this turn and a volume spike. The limited, we pointed this trade out on a touch of the 10 period EMA and a spike. The next day we gapped up on earnings, and we've been moving sideways ever since. We had a box trade here last week. the last crossover after a nice base is only a month away, so this could turn around and move higher. Now, taking a look, let's see who the last stock was on this list. Precision Drilling, oversold here, a nice flag after this breakout above this Kirby level. The bullish crossover only occurred a month ago, in July, 6 weeks ago. And we have WellCare Group, which has a nice cup and handle pattern. We popped out of here. We're consolidating here along the 10-period EMA, watching these Kirby levels here, and volume. We want to see a volume spike and stochastics turn around and go north. My weekly watch list here, I have a group of stocks that, if you're paying attention to the news, you note that we have warships moving over to the Eastern Mediterranean, and will likely sit off the coast of Syria. There's talk about some intervention, and all of these stocks are related to defensive names. Okay, Alliant Technosystems, you can check out my blog for an explanation of these, and you can see what I posted on defensive names going into the week, rather than going through a video to cover them. This is Cousin Vinny coming to you from theclosingprint.com, as well as Day Trader Bootcamp. I hope this helps, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.